Tonight, congressional chaos.
I do not regret negotiating.
The battle inside the GOP as Republicans search for a new House Speaker after a historic ouster. Plus, the dark horse meets reality.
Look, no one is going to pull votes away from Donald Trump by hopping into this race.
And change could be coming to the Catholic Church.
Women were ministers in the early church.
The Pope opens a major meeting that could bring shifts not seen since Vatican II. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
House Republicans start throwing their hats in the ring as the historic search for a new speaker gets underway. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And in Washington, I'm John Jessup. With just about 40 days before government funding is set to expire, the United States House of Representatives is without a full-time leader.
Tensions are running high for the House GOP, but they'll have to come together to elect a new speaker, and soon. For more on who could get the job, we turn to George Thomas. George, a chaotic time in the House. What's next?
Yeah, that's putting it mildly, Jenna. With McCarthy gone, Republicans now have a week to select someone who can lead the divided chamber. A few contenders are emerging. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio officially becoming the first Republican lawmaker to announce that he's interested in the job. In a letter to fellow Republican colleagues, Jordan writes, quote, "We are at a critical crossroads in our nation's history. Now is the time for our Republican conference to come together to keep our promises to Americans. The problem we face are challenging, but they are not insurmountable. But no matter what we do, we must do it together as a conference. I respectfully ask for your support for Speaker of the House of Representatives." Meanwhile, Louisiana Steve Scalise, the number 2 in the House leadership, also announced that he's in the running. Scalise, the House Majority Leader, is well respected, as you know, across the political aisle, but a cancer diagnosis could derail his chances. The 57-year-old announced in September that he's undergoing treatment for multiple myeloma. Florida Representative Matt Gaetz, speaking with reporters on Capitol Hill following McCarthy's removal yesterday, had this to say about a potential Scalise speakership.
I'm not here to make a judgment on where Mr. Scalise stands with his rehabilitation and recovery. I would give him the deference to be able to decide whether or not he'd like to put himself forward as a candidate, but he'd be the type of person that I could see myself supporting.
New York's Elise Stefanik, Oklahoma's Tom Cole, and Minnesota's Tom Emmer are other notable mentions. The goal is to have all Republicans hopefully make their pitch next Tuesday and select a new Speaker of the House by Wednesday. In the meantime, Representative Patrick McHenry is the acting House Speaker.
George, no matter who Republicans choose to replace Kevin McCarthy, there's really no guarantee the new Speaker can heal the deep divide within the party, is there?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, John. While Tuesday's vote to take down McCarthy was historic, some say it was a decision that was a decade in the making. A battle that's been brewing since the Tea Party movement of 2010, pitting the party's political establishment, that is, against a base that's been demanding a complete overhaul of Congress and believes Washington is broken. As you can imagine, both sides came out swinging after the vote.
It's not worth misleading people. It's not worth misleading people on both sides of the aisle. For me, it's not ideological. It's about having a leader in our nation who will tell the truth, who you can trust. And that's what the American people deserve.
It's a total distraction. It is some sort of pseudo-psycho-political fetish that we don't have time for.
Fox News' Brett Baird tells CBN News it's not clear right now if there's a candidate who can get the support of both GOP moderates and its far-right members.
So the question is, you know, who are you going to get that's going to be able to link everyone together? And I think that there's some doubt about how they're going to be able to get forward to that person. That's the limbo we're in right now. But I think that, you know, it's a process, and politics plays a big role in some of these decisions.
John and Jenna, as you both know, both sides have just a few weeks left to hash out a deal with Democrats and to fund the government and to avoid a shutdown. Guys, back to you.
All right, CBN's George Thomas. Thank you so much, George. Well, one of the 8 Republicans who thrust the House into the turmoil we're experiencing, that voting Kevin McCarthy out of his speakership, told CBN News why he was a yes vote.
A Virginia Republican, Bob Good, says McCarthy was unfit for the job. He spoke with CBN's Matt Galka earlier today about the speakership and what's next.
All right, joining us now, Virginia Congressman Bob Good. I appreciate the time, and I know it's been a busy last 24 hours for you, so we'll jump right into it. You've had a chance to sleep on it. I would assume you've had a chance to sleep on it at least. After taking some time, having some perspective now, are you satisfied with everything about how the process played out yesterday to remove now former Speaker Kevin McCarthy?
Well, it was a sad decision to have to vote to remove our speaker. It was not a difficult decision, unfortunately, because of the failures of leadership that have been demonstrated this year and culminating with what happened on Saturday with the continuing resolution. So it was with a heavy heart that I approached it, and a disquieted spirit with the conflict that was ahead. However, I was thankful that we were able to prevail in what needed to be done for the country, for the good of the country. And I'm encouraged by what has transpired since then. I am persuaded, convinced that we will emerge with a more unified conference, because we will have to come together and vote in a new speaker with 218, hopefully 221 votes. Hopefully it'll be unanimous among Republicans. We want to choose a David, not a Saul. So we want to prayerfully, humbly approach this and vet these candidates and do the best we can for the American people. The country cannot afford us to do anything less. And so I'm encouraged. But again, the real work is beginning now, and we're committed to that.
What was the deciding factor in your vote?
Instead of passing our spending bills as he promised he would, and keeping his commitment to cut back to pre-COVID spending for non-defense discretionary, he dillied and dallied. He was a feckless leader. He couldn't decide. He didn't lead the conference. We didn't pass those bills. And yet then he responds with a continuing resolution on Saturday that Democrats vote 209-1 in the House and 51-0 in the Senate, because it keeps in place all the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that we're suffering under, that are destroying the country, and that are bankrupting us from a fiscal standpoint. Why wouldn't all Democrats vote for that? We don't need a Republican speaker or a Republican majority to do what the Democrats want us to do. So we need change. The country can't afford more of the status quo.
Obviously, we're looking ahead now. Who's the next Speaker of the House?
There's about a half a dozen individuals who've raised their hand. It's funny, media was just hounding me saying, oh, who's going to be the candidate? Who's going to be the candidate? Before we had the vote yesterday. And I told them, listen, no one of stature, of influence, that would be perceived as has a credible chance to get 218 is going to raise their hand and say, I'm a candidate before Speaker McCarthy is removed, because of retaliation, because of consequence, and because they would be perceived as being part of the sort of overthrow, for lack of a better term. They needed to emerge organically. After there was the opportunity for a true contest, a true competition, not a coronation like we've had in the past, but they will have to earn it now. And so you got a half a dozen or so who've thrown their hat in the rings. 2 or 3 of those I think would be really quality candidates from my perspective.
Well, the names that are out there right now, Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, could those gentlemen, could you support one of them? And the reason I ask that is because they are considered McCarthy allies. And I'm just curious, how does an emerging new candidate for Speaker of the House who might have been backing Kevin McCarthy, how does he get the votes after what we saw yesterday, where there was a portion of the conference that didn't want Kevin McCarthy in there? How did they support one of his allies?
Well, again, I will not comment on individual names one way or another at this point. I don't think that would be wise for me to do. However, I think everybody is approaching this pragmatically and realizing there's going to be some compromise, some give and take, because it takes 218. And so it's likely someone who was at least reasonably supportive of Speaker McCarthy, at least publicly anyway. But I think it'll be someone who is going to require somebody who has widespread respect and stature and influence within the conference to get to that 218. It's probably not going to be one of the 8 individuals who voted to vacate the chair, I would suggest.
Virginia Congressman Bob Good, I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Great interview, and we'll be watching for sure. All right. Well, each year, people across the nation tune in to the NBA and NFL drafts. But here in D.C., the hottest ticket in town is nothing to do with sports. Instead, many politicos are considering who could be drafted into the 2024 race for the White House.
That's why D.C. is considered a nerd city. A name some suspect will get the call. Virginia Governor Glenn Younkin, CBN's chief political analyst David Brody reports on why that suspicion is growing.
A retreat at the historic Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach seems like a relaxing getaway, but this one will be anything but. Virginia Governor Glenn Younkin will meet with wealthy GOP donors hoping to convince him to run for president. Matt Schlapp is chairman of the American Conservative Union.
There's been now this talk that he might be the next man up, if you will, to take down Trump in the GOP race. What do you make of all of the talk about donors being interested in him now, Matt?
I don't know. It's like Elizabeth Taylor getting married. They seem to get all hot and bothered about the next prospect. It doesn't last very long.
The event, unofficially called the Red Vest Retreat, aptly named for Younkin because of his ever-present wardrobe item during his successful run for governor. His popularity has grown after taking the lead on a popular parental rights agenda. Donors see him as a sensible, results-oriented governor who helped turn a blue state red. While donors are interested in Younkin, the Virginia governor is playing it low-key.
Are you still considering jumping into the 2024 race?
Maria, I've said over and over again how humbling it is to even talk about my name in this context, but I am so focused on Virginia elections this year.
Luke Ball is a GOP political strategist.
Younkin has done a fantastic job in Virginia. I don't think it should behoove him to jump into a presidential race in which statistically nobody is going to be able to beat Donald Trump in this race.
Still, that's not stopping him from meeting with potential donors. And while he may not take the bait for 2024, all of this attention could be an investment in a campaign 4 years further down the road.
I think Glenn Younkin's probably, from all reputation, he's a pretty smart guy. I'm not sure he's going to take the bait on this. I don't think anybody really can beat Trump. The only person who could beat Trump is Trump.
That seems to be true. Donors jumped behind Florida Governor Ron DeSantis when he first entered the race, but DeSantis hasn't taken off. Why would Younkin be any different?
Look, no one is going to pull votes away from Donald Trump by hopping into this race. There's not some Glenn Younkin faction among the Trump 2024 base that is going to say, oh, Governor Glenn Younkin has jumped in. Well, suddenly I'm going to go over and rush to him.
Of course, donors want a candidate who can catch fire so they can dump millions into their campaign. Schlapp still believes that's not a winning combination, at least this time around.
What's your message to the donor class about all of this? Look, if the donor class wants you...
This. Remember this one when we were kids?
Schlapp says Younkin and the rest of the pack have one similar flaw that conservative primary voters will notice.
They don't like this idea that a small cabal in D.C. or New York think that they're going to pick the nominee. And those people are going to really have no role in deciding who the nominee is. And I think it's great.
That leaves Younkin with food for thought as donors get ready to knock on his front door. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, David. And for more on the 2024 race for the White House, we're joined by Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, welcome. So, whether it's Younkin or one of the other GOP candidates, do you see a scenario where Donald Trump is not the Republican nominee?
It's hard to see. I mean, I'm not a betting man, and I don't know that people are looking to Faith Nation to set betting odds, so I won't do it. But Trump is very likely to be the nominee. And what's interesting about Younkin is that if he gets in, there's no guarantee that anyone else is going to get out. I don't think that Governor Nikki Haley is going to say, oh, okay, fine, Younkin's in, I'm out of the race. And we also have to remember that the team that helped elect Younkin governor is all behind DeSantis right now. That doesn't mean Younkin can't win or won't get in, but there's a lot of moving parts here. And Trump, it's still continuing on the path for Trump winning.
Nathan, today we learned two big names are now running for the speakership, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. We just heard Representative Bob Good also mention about a half dozen other candidates might run. How soon might we see someone take the gavel? And do you think former President Trump will weigh in and put his thumb on the scale?
Well, it's interesting you bring up Trump because there are a few members that are floating him as a potential speaker. Remember that you don't have to be a member of the House in order to be Speaker of the House, although current rules for Republican leadership are that you can't be under indictment. So Republicans would literally have to change the rules in order to have Trump be the Speaker. And so Trump is toying with that publicly like he is everything else. I think in the next few days, you're going to see Scalise and Jordan start to add up votes and see what they get, and see what they think they can get. By the time we get to Tuesday or Wednesday, the field might look differently depending on what those totals look like. And I'll say that Congressman Good, that interview was interesting because he said, well, we need someone who's going to have a broad consensus among the caucus. And Kevin McCarthy had that. He just didn't have 8 members of the caucus. So I don't think that Good and some of the Gates and these others are almost asking someone to do the impossible, and that is get everything Republicans want while working with a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine who would want that job when the same thing could happen to the next man or woman. All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections, it's always good to see you. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
Well, tackling issues in the Catholic Church. A look at the agenda of a meeting at the Vatican and why some Catholics are already pushing back. We're back in just 2 minutes.
Welcome back. A month-long meeting at the Vatican could bring change to the Catholic Church. Kicking off the Synod on synodality today, the Pope said the welcoming gaze of Jesus also invites us to be a welcoming church. Conservative and liberal Catholics alike are wary the meeting, which involves lay people, women and bishops, could lead to major shifts. After the Pope's recent letter suggesting an openness to Catholic blessings for same-sex couples and a willingness to study the idea of women ordained as priests. Also at issue, church teachings on contraception and abortion. In Rome, advocates for women's ordination held a prayer vigil on the eve of the Synod.
Women were ministers in the early church, and they need to be restored to ministry. The Catholic people around the world, in every country, have spoken, and they have all mentioned women priests.
Another big issue, the sexual abuse scandal, as survivors and advocates demand new safeguards.
And Father Thomas Reese is a Jesuit priest and senior analyst at Religion News Service. He's in Rome for the Synod and joins us now for more. Father Reese, thank you so much for being with us. Are you worried that some of the decisions that may or may not come out of this meeting could potentially cause a schism in the Catholic Church?
No, I don't think so at all. You know, there are disagreements in the Catholic Church, just as there are disagreements in all churches. But I don't think there's any danger of a schism. The people who are most critical of Pope Francis are really a very small minority. Most people in the pews love Pope Francis. They like him, they admire him, and they support the things that he's doing in the church.
You know, we mentioned some of the concerns. Some of the top concerns for Pope Francis are climate change and the plight of the poor. Could those issues, Father Reese, overshadow some of the more contentious ideas like women as priests or blessings for same-sex couples?
Well, it's interesting. This is, of course, an international meeting, and people from Europe and the United States, the big issues for them are women priests or women deacons, and the whole question of blessing gay couples. But when you talk to people from Africa and Asia and Latin America, they're concerned about poverty. They're concerned about refugees. They're concerned about civil wars and fighting. So, you know, as a church that brings together the entire world, there's all these issues. And, for the entire world, of course, there is the issue of climate change and global warming, which the Pope issued a document on this very day.
So you just mentioned some of the more contentious issues. What are some of the consensus issues that bring Catholics together, whether you're on the quote-unquote liberal faction or the more conservative faction?
Well, I think that Pope Francis is really trying to emphasize that. For him, the Synod is going to be about communion or unity, and that unity is with God and with one another as brothers and sisters. And then from there, he wants us to reaffirm, take on the mission that Jesus has given us of preaching the gospel, of treating one another as brothers and sisters, of working for justice and peace. This is what he wants. He really wants the laity to step up and take responsibility.
Father Thomas Reese in Rome this evening, thank you so much. It's great to see you and have a great stay there.
Thank you, Father Reese.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Still to come, another attempt to cancel student debt. Today's announcement from the White House when we come back. Welcome back. Relief may be on the way for some student loan borrowers.
President Biden announced today he's approved $9 billion in loan forgiveness.
This kind of relief is life-changing for individuals and their families, but it's good for our economy as a whole as well. By freeing millions of Americans from the crushing burden of student debt, it means they can go and get their lives in order. They can think about buying a house. They can start a business. They can be starting a family. This matters.
The $9 billion in student loan forgiveness will affect about 125,000 Americans, the bulk of it, $5 billion, going to people who've worked in public service for more than a decade. $2.8 billion will go to people enrolled in income-driven repayment plans, and $1.2 billion is for people with disabilities. There is, of course, a big concern about the constitutionality of this move. A similar program was shot down by the U.S. Supreme Court this past summer.
Coming up, a new world record, not for the faint of heart. You're watching Faith Nation. We'll be back right after this. Well, finally tonight, a group of special forces in the United States Air Force have taken skydiving to new heights, Jenna.
That's right. In the process, they set a new world record and helped support their community. Members of Alpha 5 team set the record for halo formation skydiving. The group jumped from an altitude of 38,000 feet, the highest ever for such a jump. During their free fall, the team formed their record-breaking halo formation. Not only did the group set a new record, they also raised money in the process. It'll go to support children of fallen warriors. That's an amazing cause. And John, you've jumped out of a plane before.
I have, but I didn't do that. Jenna, I think we should get a crew of us here at Faith Nation just to go skydiving and try to do formation. Like, we can make our own halo.
Can I be the photographer on the ground?
No, you'd be right there. Like, we'd be linking arms together.
In the halo formation.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.